So it's a real pleasant opportunity to have a time to just share some thoughts about what we observe as a changing geopolitical environment, and more particularly about the diplomatic relations between South Africa and Mauritius. Well, as I said, the world as we knew it late 2021 has changed dramatically from February 2022. It's absolutely important for us as African countries that we understand the shifts in power and influence across the globe so that we develop the ability to respond effectively. It's not often that as Africans we have the opportunity to set the global tone, but I think the disruptions we're observing today are an opportunity for us to exert rather more influence on geopolitical matters than we may have thought of doing a year and a half or so ago. And so I do think as the continent and its people and leadership, we really need to more thoroughly analyze what is happening, problematize, and as the global South, I think we need to bring some influence to bear. And I'm not sure we're doing enough analytical thinking. I think we may be wasting the moment, and I really worry about that. I think we should be putting our heads together and saying, what does this mean? How do we use it astutely to good effect in the interests of the South, in the interest of the continent? I'll speak to some examples later. One of them would be that the current developments illustrate the very worrying failure of the United Nations Security Council. Are we going to allow it to continue modeled as it is, or are we going to use our 54-country membership to begin to wield influence in insisting on the reform of the UNSC? If we don't, I think we waste a moment. So it's that kind of, I think, intervention that we need to be talking about more concretely as the African continent. And I worry that we sometimes become observers rather than actors. And it is a matter that I do think we need to correct. We've faced really tough years in the past 3 decades for South Africa and certainly for the developing world and the continent in particular. We've seen the rise of terrorism. We've seen a growing rivalry among the larger economic powers in the globe. And this impacts on us in sometimes a very deleterious fashion. There's been immense technological change, and we are not yet fully digitized, but the world is moving ahead with or without us. So all of these changes occurring in just a short space of 3 decades are changes we've got to come to grips with much more directly in our own interest. We've also seen the rise of emerging economies, such as China, India, to some degree Brazil, and others. All of these have impacted on the nature of the world as we knew it, and I think have impacted on the African continent as well. I know with respect to China, wherever I go, they keep asking me, how much influence does China have over your country and its policies? And I keep telling people China is a friend of South Africa. It's never told us what we should do. There's no government leader in China who's ever said, you must have a road in this place, or you must have energy here. We interface as diplomatic friends. And so this notion that is in the air, that Africa is controlled by China, is something I wish academics could challenge more directly and more astutely, because we have allowed a myth to develop. And it's this notion that as Africans we're unable to think for ourselves, and there has to be some large power which is telling us what we should do. And I really think some of these ridiculous notions need us to challenge them. We are seeing increasingly countries of the South growing in economic stature and asserting themselves on the world stage. And I certainly believe there has been a shift in the balance of power. And it is this that's causing disruption. And anyone who wants to pretend that there isn't a shift, they're fooling themselves. It's happening as we live it. And with that, of course, new challenges emerge. Individuals who are powerful don't like to be challenged. It's awful to lose power. It's awful to imagine that you might not be number one. And I suspect that if we were number one, if someone threatened it, you'd want to do all that you can to retain that position. And so we should be aware that what we're seeing now is not the worst of what we might see. And we should prepare ourselves and ready ourselves in order to stand for ourselves as Africa, as the world becomes increasingly disrupted. The power shifts mean that the resources of Africa also face even increased threat. And that's why suddenly the conversation in world boardrooms is about rare earth minerals. Where do they come from? African continent. And the conversation is not about refining them in Africa. It's not about building new factories. It's about continuing to extract and value add elsewhere. We need to shift these conversations as the African continent. We have Agenda 2063, which aspires to the development of the African continent, to inclusive prosperity for us on the continent, to us industrializing, to us developing niche markets as the African continent, to us making far better use of the natural resources that we have on our continent. But we're still allowing conversations about our natural resources to occur outside our borders. Very few of us are talking about enhancing industrial capacity. Very few of us are talking about training new skills that can refine platinum, that can make use of cobalt, that can ensure that batteries are manufactured in Africa, that our lithium is devoted to increased industrial activity on the continent. So I really think that we've got to begin to reimagine how we may ensure the growth and development of Africa. And while it is imperative that we continue to build our strong relations as we've done in South Africa with China, India, and Brazil, that relationship should not be one again of an extractive partnership. It must be a development partnership on terms that we set. And if we don't realize that we actually can set terms, then I'm afraid we've got really bad leaders and we're in even worse trouble than I thought. We also have, of course, the demographic dividend on the continent of young people. We should make good use of it. We should ensure that young people are getting the opportunity of quality education, that they have access to scarce skills, not the repetition of old programs that we've offered previously. And again, my apologies to all those working in fields where we don't necessarily refer to scarce skills. We also are seeing, worryingly, in many developed countries, the rise of an unfortunate chauvinistic nationalism that I think has less interest in international collaboration and far greater attention to domestic development. So a lot of countries are speaking more and more about their internal benefit and development rather than expanding global relations. And this is something we also have to be alert to and worried about. We see it in a range of guises. For example, when COVID-19 hit all of us, many of us were not producing protective equipment for the health sector or for ourselves as ordinary citizens. We were not producers of masks, for example, on the scale that became necessary during COVID-19. So many countries, our friends, sent us a lot of this equipment. So in the first instance, when it concerned masks, protective gear for our health workers, we got a lot of assistance. But what we didn't get were test kits. And the minute that vaccines became available, the international collaboration almost paused. This should be a huge lesson to us as the continent, that we must develop our capacity to produce goods that will protect us during future health emergencies. And if we do not recognize that health preparedness for pandemics is a critical area of endeavor, we're going to be faced by even worse pandemics in future, and will really have a terrible effect on the continent. So the lesson of vaccine nationalism should just urge us to make the pharmaceutical sector huge, the biosector really critically innovative on the continent, so that we're able to respond. We're also seeing, in terms of policies from many of our friends, very populist immigration policies that are designed to reject diversity and to keep people from the continent out of a number of countries, particularly in Europe, but elsewhere. And we should be alert to some of these populist and negative sentiments that we have to grapple with. I truly believe that, we shouldn't always prepare for our people to be migrated elsewhere. We must grow our economy so our people don't need to be economic migrants. And we can do that as Africa very well, and exchange skills and create diverse communities. So if we were doing the right thing in terms of innovation, economic development, value addition, we would be able to utilize critical skills in our own continent. But because we don't create new industries, because we don't have active research centers, we don't have hundreds of innovation hubs, our young people feel they must go elsewhere. So we must become active in all these areas. We are also using the opportunity to build stronger links on the African continent. For example, one of the areas in which we are resolute is making the African Continental Free Trade Area opportunity work. A great deal of work has been done at the inception of ratification of the AFCFTA, and I'm really pleased that we've already completed the tariff list with respect to goods that would be tariff-free, and many countries on the continent, 47, have completed ratification. So there's a good opportunity confronting us to increase intra-African trade from the current low levels and ensure that we develop productive capacity for intra-African trade of goods produced in Africa, not imported goods that we relabel in Africa as produced in Africa. We really must address capacity on the continent. And of course we want to trade with all of the world, but I think we have to take a stand and say we're absolutely keen to trade goods from the United States, America, and elsewhere, but we do encourage you to establish factories in Africa. Because otherwise, we will not change our condition. And we cannot live as we have lived for so many centuries. Finally, with respect to Mauritius and South Africa, we have very strong links, and I'm really pleased about that. My presence here is to strengthen the links between the two countries. We have excellent trade relations, but I believe together we can do much more. I believe South Africa can learn a great deal from Mauritius about building an excellent tourism sector, for example. South Africa has a lot to offer in tourism, but it is not yet our biggest contributor to the GDP of South Africa. We can increase its contribution if we refine our product successfully. I also think Mauritius and South Africa are two fairly stable democracies in Southern Africa. And so we can be of assistance to strengthening democracy in SADC, but broadly on the continent as well. I think we have good functioning institutions that can assist other countries with their electoral bodies, with their electoral systems, even with electoral laws that allow multi-party existence, because often diversity is what causes the political tensions in our various countries. So we've agreed with the Foreign Minister, Minister Ganu, that we are going to work together to expand trade between our countries, but also that we are going to look at how we can improve productive capacity in Mauritius as well as productive capacity in South Africa. How we might support South Africa to reverse the deindustrialization that had been underway for some time and really begin to ensure that we have a strong industrial sector, that we introduce new technologies in key sectors such as agriculture and mining. We've also agreed to collaborate on tourism. We want to draw our private sectors closer together, the private sector of Mauritius, the private sector of South Africa. I've already met the South African Business Chamber in Mauritius, so I'm really glad we have so many South Africans here. We have too few Mauritian business persons in South Africa. We need to encourage that exchange. We've also agreed that we must strengthen people-to-people exchange, because we tend not to have a great deal of that level of collaboration. And fourthly, we've agreed that we must collaborate through our higher education institutions in encouraging postgraduate student exchanges. We do a lot of this with Europe, with the United States, but insufficiently with the African continent. Too few of our young people complete their PhDs in multiple countries, and I think they should. I think it's really bad to do a PhD in the same university you did your BA, your master's, your honors, and PhD. I think international experience for research purposes is absolutely important, and we need to encourage it with African students at the postgraduate level as well. I would like to see us having shared laboratories where centers of excellence in South Africa collaborate with centers of excellence in Mauritius. I'd like to see our university academics agreeing on modules that would be done in one country or the other, depending on our various capacities. So I, with Minister Ganu, see a huge amount of opportunity between the two countries, because one of the things we have to do is have some success markers on the continent. And if we can, working together with other countries, develop, say, 20 really successful countries on the continent that then become a lever and pull for the rest of us, we think this would be a really good attempt at a fundamental alteration of our current condition.